Welcome to the Conspiracy Atlas. In war, truth is the first casualty, and sometimes the war itself is born from a lie. Around the world throughout time, governments have staged, manipulated, or allowed attacks to occur, not to protect their people, but to control them. These events are known as false flags, a covert operation designed to deceive the public, to shift blame, and to create an enemy when there was none. In this episode of the Conspiracy Atlas, I will peel back the curtain of history and reveal real documented false flag operations that have been used to justify wars, pass laws, or even consolidate power. This isn't speculation. This is confirmed accounts, declassified files, and whistleblowers. We begin on the eve of the Second World War, August 31st, 1939. The world stands on the brink of chaos. That night, operatives dressed in Polish military uniforms storm a German radio station near the town of Gliwice, Poland. They broadcast a brief anti-message in Polish, then leave behind a corpse dressed as a Polish soldier. What the world doesn't know, the man is a German prisoner, murdered and staged by the SS. The next day, Germany declares war on Poland, citing this Polish aggression as justification, but it was a lie. This incident was part of Operation Himmler, a series of stage attacks meant to make Poland appear hostile. Now, Operation Himmler was a series of stage attacks devised by the SS and the Gestapo under orders from Reichsführer Heinrich Himmler and directed by Reinhard Heydrich. The goal, to create the illusion that Poland is attacking Germany. And the most infamous of these operations, you guessed it, the Gliwice incident. Now let's take it back on the night of August 31st, 1939. It's 8 p.m. A team of German operatives dressed in Polish military uniforms seized control of a small German radio station, now modern-day Gliwice in Poland. Led by Alfred Naujoks, an SS officer under direct orders from Heydrich, the squad broadcasts a short anti-German message in Polish. The transmission was brief and crude, but that wasn't the real objective. The key to the operation lay outside the studio. The SS had brought along a prisoner, a 43-year-old Polish farmer named Franciszek Honiak. Honiak was selected because of his known sympathies toward Poland. The Germans called him a perfect corpse. He was drugged, executed by gunshot, and dressed in Polish uniform. His body was dumped at the site to appear as one of the Polish attackers. The SS called these victims conserve, canned goods, human props, used to sell a lie to the world. What happened the next day? September 1st, 1939. The Reich announced that Germany had been attacked by Poland. German troops crossed the border within hours. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. World War II had begun. But the truth would come out later, in pieces, during the Nuremberg trials. Alfred Naujoks testified to the role in the Gliwice false flag. His confession detailed the entire plan, from the uniforms to the corps to the orders from the highest ranks of the regime. The Gliwice incident wasn't just a deception, it was a manufactured spark designed to ignite a firestorm that killed over 70 million people. And so we ask, if a government can fake an attack to launch the deadliest war in human history, what else might they be willing to do? Now let's fast forward to the Cold War, 1962. The U.S. government is desperate to overthrow Fidel Castro in Cuba. So desperate, in fact, that the Joint Chiefs of Staff proposed a chilling plan. Operation Northwoods, a now declassified Pentagon document which outlines it, fake terrorist attacks on American soil, hijacked planes, bombings, and even staging the deaths of U.S. citizens, all to be blamed on Cuba. The plan suggests sinking a boat of Cuban refugees, blowing up a U.S. ship, and using fake funerals to generate public outrage. But President JFK rejected these plans. Of course, we know what happened later. Operation Northwoods remained classified for over 35 years. When it surfaced, it shook the public's trust in the U.S. military to its core. It proved that top military brass were willing to kill Americans if it meant winning a war. The Cold War era was steeped in paranoia. The Soviet Union and the United States were locked in global crisis, but just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, a new regime was taking shape, Fidel Castro's Cuba. To Washington, Cuba was more than a thorn. It was a potential Soviet missile base in America's backyard, and the pressure to remove Castro was mounting. In 1961, the failed Bay of Pigs invasion humiliated the CIA, but behind closed doors, another far darker operation and proposal was taking shape. In 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, led by Lyman Lemser, drafted Operation Northwoods, a top-secret plan that proposed a series of false flag attacks against American civilians and military assets. The goal? Fabricate evidence of Cuban aggression to justify a U.S. invasion. They weren't hypothetical ideas. They were written, bullet-pointed, and presented in an official absolute document. One scenario proposed using a drone aircraft designed as a passenger airplane. It would be swapped mid-flight, remotely detonated, and planned on the Cubans using fake radio transmission. Another suggested staging shootings and bombings in American cities, targeting civilians, and blaming it on communist operatives. That document openly discusses the public reaction, outrage, fear, and a call for retaliation. But there was one problem, or rather, the president. President JFK at the time rejected the plans, outright flatly. He was reportedly appalled by the proposal and began distancing himself from the military who created it. Operation Northwoods was buried classified for nearly 4 decades. It wasn't until the year 2000 that journalist James Banford uncovered the documents through the Freedom of Information Act. By then, most Americans had no idea their government had once considered killing its own citizens to manipulate public opinion. Quote, "It is the most corrupt plan ever created by the U.S. government, and it came from the top military leadership." Unquote. James Bradford, author of Body of Secrets. Operation Northwoods never went operational, but its existence is undeniable. A declassified reminder that the machinery of war doesn't always require foreign enemies. Sometimes it only needs permission. And the scariest part about it, what if Kennedy hadn't said no? Would it have worked? And also it makes you think, September 11th, 2001, was Operation Northwoods used? Let that sink in. Now let's take a time machine back to 1898, to the waters of Havana, Cuba, February 15th. The USS Maine, a U.S. Navy ship, explodes in the Havana harbor. 260 American sailors are killed. The U.S. blames Spain, and public outcry fuels a war fever. "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain," becomes the battle cry. But years later, investigation suggests the explosion likely came from within the ship, possibly a coal bunker fire. There was no clear evidence that Spain had anything to do with it. Still, the incident gave the U.S. a reason to enter the Spanish-American War and seize control of territories like the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. It's not the first time tragedy was used to justify expansion, and it wouldn't be the last. Sometimes a single explosion can reshape a continent's destiny, and sometimes the cause of the explosion is buried beneath politics, propaganda, and even for profit. As I stated, our story begins February 15, 1898. At the time, Cuba was under Spanish rule, and a rebellion was brewing. The United States had economic and strategic interests in the region, and a growing sympathy for Cuban independence, stoked by sensationalist newspapers and public outcry. To protect U.S. interests and citizens during rising tensions, President William McKinley deployed a massive new warship, the USS Maine, to Havana Harbor. It was a calm night, February 15th. Without warning, a catastrophic explosion ripped through the forward magazines and the bows of the ship of the USS Maine. 260 American sailors were killed, and only 94 survived. Within 24 hours, the headlines had already written the story. Spain did it. The nation erupted in anger, driven by yellow journalism, is what they called it. Exaggerated emotional reporting from men like William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer. Quote, "The rallying cry, 'Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain,' swept across the United States. Just 2 months later, the U.S. declared war on Spain. The war was a swift and fruitful ambition for the United States. America gained control of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. A new global empire was born." But what really caused the explosion? A former Navy inquiry at the time claimed the Maine had been struck by an external mind, but no physical evidence supported the conclusion. In fact, Spain had every reason to avoid the war. They welcomed an investigation and even offered assistance. Almost nearly 80 years later, in 1976, a team of naval investigators, led by Admiral Hynek Rickover, conducted a thorough re-examination using modern technique. Their conclusion? The blast most likely came from within the ship, probably due to a spontaneous coal bunker fire that ignited the nearby ammunition store. No evidence of a minor sabotage was found. The explosion was likely accidental. If true, this remains the United States went to war and seized a global empire based on a simple accident. But the government was never officially corrected for this record. The myth was a far cry for justice after it became a pretext for conquest. The USS Maine still rests beneath the harbor it once protected, and the truth behind it is destructive remains a cautionary tale. How easily grief can become outrage, and how quickly outrage becomes a reason for war. It's August 1964. The United States stood on the edge of full-scale war in Southeast Asia, but it would take one mysterious event in the dark waters of the night of the Gulf of Tonkin to push the nation over its edge. The U.S. had been quietly escalating its involvement in Vietnam for years. supporting the South Vietnamese government in its fight against communist forces in the north led by Ho Chi Minh. But the American public had not yet given a reason to support an open war. That changed on August 4th, 1964. According to official reports, the USS Maddox, a U.S. Navy destroyer, was patrolling international waters when it was attacked by North Vietnamese patrol boats. 2 days later, a second destroyer, the USS Turner Joy, allegedly experienced a second wave of attacks during a nighttime storm. Radar showed fast approaching enemy vessels, torpedoes were reported, gun crews fired into the darkness. And within hours, President Johnson addressed the nation. He described deliberate attacks against American ships in international waters and asked Congress to authorize to respond. Congress delivered. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution passed almost unanimously. It gave the president sweeping powers to use military force in Vietnam without a formal declaration of war. But what if the second attack never happened? What if the entire justification for war was built on fear, shadows, and unknown sources? In the decades that followed, declassified documents, naval reports, and first-hand accounts painted a very different picture. There was a real skirmish on August 2nd, but August 4th, there were no Vietnamese boats, no torpedoes, no confirmed enemy fire. Instead, radar signals had been misinterpreted. Sonar operators mistook rough seas as shadows for torpedo boats. Johnson was told there was uncertainty. Intelligence officials raised doubts, but the president still went forward, choosing to present the incident as a clear-cut aggression. He later confessed privately, "For all I know, our Navy boats were shooting at whales out there." The cost of deception? Over 58,000 American lives and over 3 million Vietnamese deaths. A nation was divided, generations were scarred, and it all began with a false story. A moment of manufactured clarity that turned into confusion, into a catastrophe. The Gulf of Tonkin incident remains a stark example of how ambiguous intelligence can be weaponized into absolute truth when a war is needed to be sold. February 27, 1933. The German parliament building, the Reichstag, is engulfed in flames. The party quickly arrests a Dutch communist named Marinus van der Lubbe, accusing him of arson. But many historians believe the fire was orchestrated, designed to create panic and justify emergency powers for the Führer. The day after the fire, the Führer persuades President Hindenburg to pass the Reichstag fire decree, suspending civil liberties, allowing mass arrests, and effectively ending democracy in Germany. It worked, and within months, the Führer consolidates power as Chancellor, and the Third Reich rises. A single spark can start a revolution, or even extinguish one. On a cold night in Berlin, fire engulfed the building that symbolized democracy in Germany. By dawn, freedom itself was in flames. As I stated, the year is 1933. Germany is politically fractured. The economy is in ruins. Extremist parties battle for influence. And in the midst of this chaos, one man is rising, and you know who that man is. Just a month earlier, he had been appointed Chancellor of Germany, leading a coalition government, but his gripe on power was still weak. He needed a crisis to become a dictator. At 9:27 p.m., flames erupt inside the Reichstag, the seat of the German parliament. Fire crews arrive, but it's too late. The building is consumed. News spreads quickly. The symbol of the German Republic has been destroyed. Police arrive and arrest a man, a Dutch drifter named Marinus van der Lubbe. He is shirtless, confused, and claims full responsibility. He says he acted alone to protest the oppression of the working class. But the leadership wastes no time. Within hours, the Führer declares the fire a work of a vast communist conspiracy. He demands immediate action. The next day, President Paul von Hindenburg, under the Führer's urging, signs the Reichstag fire decree. This decree abolishes civil liberties, freedom of speech, the press, assembly, privacy, and habeas corpus, all gone. The party began arresting political opponents by the thousands. In the weeks that follow, the Communist Party is banned, and the power becomes absolute. Was van der Lubbe really acting alone? Many historians and even some former members of the party suggest the fire was orchestrated by the party themselves as a false flag operation. Why? To incite fear, to crush dissent, to consolidate power. And it worked. At a luncheon with Georg in 1942, General Franz Halder boasted that the only person who knew the Reichstag building well enough to it ablaze so quickly was himself. Marinus van der Lubbe was tried, convicted, and executed by guillotine, but no solid evidence has ever proved he acted alone or that he even started the fire. The Reichstag fire was more than an arson. It was an accelerant and escalation. It ignited the transformation of Germany from a fragile democracy into a, of course, fascist regime. and the formula was simple: create a crisis, blame your enemies, demand emergency power, and never give them back. The Führer found his empire, and the world soon found itself at war. Europe, post-World War II, NATO, along with the CIA and MI6, launched Operation Gladio, a covert program to create stay-behind armies in case of Soviet invasion. But things spiral into something darker. In countries like Italy, Belgium, and Turkey, elements of Gladio orchestrate bombings and assassins designed to blame on leftist groups. But one of the most famous attacks, the 1980 Bologna train station bombing, which killed 85 people. Years later, former operatives and government officials confirmed that Gladio was involved in false flag terrorism meant to sway elections and keep the far left out of power. It's called the strategy of tension. Terrorism used not to destroy the state, but to strengthen it. After World War II, Europe was exhausted. Cities laid in ruins, democracy was fragile, and a new Cold War was rising. But beneath the surface of NATO, their mission to protect the free world, another war was brewing, a secret war. And it was not fought with soldiers on front lines, but with bombs in crowded streets, masked gunmen, and manufactured fear. It was called Operation Gladio. Gladio was a covert NATO project, launched with the help of the CIA and MI6, designed to prepare for a potential Soviet invasion of Western Europe. It established so-called stay-behind armies in dozens of countries, secret networks and anti-communism operatives, weapons caches, and guerrilla cells ready to attack in case of the Red Army occupation. But the Soviets never invaded, and Gladio's network didn't stay dormant. Instead, elements with these secret armies were used to carry out false flag terrorism attacks and blame left-wing radicals and communists to discredit political opposition and keep conservative governments in power in their country. The most devastating example occurred on August 2nd, 1980. A suitcase bomb exploded in the Bologna railway station, killing 85 people and injuring more than 200. It was the worst terrorist attack in Italian history. At first, neo-fascist groups were suspected, but the blame quickly shifted to left extremists. It fit the narrative, but over time, testimonies, confessions, and court records began to reveal something more darker. The strategy had a name: the strategy of tension. The idea was to create terror and then use the fear to justify authoritarian measures, demonetize communists, and consolidate control. Operation Gladio wasn't just an Italian scandal. Similar stay-behind programs existed in France, Belgium, Germany, Turkey, and even Greece. In some cases, they were linked to political assassinations, kidnappings, and even more bombings. Gladio remained secret until 1990, when Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti admitted its existence to Parliament. The public was shocked. Operation Gladio wasn't the fantasy of conspiracy theorists. It's documented truth, verified by court cases, parliamentary investigations, and former operatives themselves. This operation showed how governments in the name of fighting communism were willing to sacrifice their own civilians, not with tanks or missiles, but with calculated fear. When terror comes for you, how do you want to trust, and who can you trust? And when governments manufacture the fear, who really benefits? False flags are not theory. They are history, proven, documented, and devastating. These aren't fringe ideas. They are events acknowledged in declassified documents, court hearings, and the confessions of some who blame them. So the next time a tragedy becomes the justification for war, surveillance, suppression, ask yourselves this question: who really is behind it? And is it a false flag operation? Stay informed, stay aware, and always question the narrative of what is going on and what's happening in our world today. Be sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel, and tell your family and friends about the Conspiracy Atlas, and let me know what theory or event you want to talk about next. Thank you everyone for listening, and this has been the Conspiracy Atlas.